Recently, you've come under scrutiny by law enforcement officials. To the San Antonio police officer or any deputy that's working for Bexar County out there that's listening to this podcast, what is your message to them about your support for law enforcement?
There are reasons why some high-profile folks in law enforcement have called for your resignation. There are differences there. There are issues there.
Welcome back, Blue Grit listeners, voyeurs. I'm your host, Tyler Owen, and I've got the big boss and a special guest today. Clint McNair took the day off. I don't know how did we manage that?
Well, he played golf yesterday. He needs a day to recuperate.
He said he was feeling a little sickly. So I don't know what doctor he went and saw. But anyway, so Clint, my co-host, is going to be absent today, but I've got a feeling that Kevin can live up to Clint's expectations.
Oh, good. Put pressure on
I do not doubt that one bit. But we got a special guest on today. First of all, thank you for coming up, I should say, to here to Travis County and into Austin and coming on the Blue Grit stage. District Attorney, Bexar County District Attorney Gonzales.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess how we got here is there's been some situations happen there in Bexar County. Before we get into that, tell us about you. Where'd you grow up? How did you get into your profession? And kind of give us a background of where you came from.
How much time have we got?
Yeah.
I've lived practically all my life in San Antonio, and I grew up on the west side of San Antonio. Was raised by a single parent. My mother raised 4 boys, one of which, by the way, is career law enforcement. My brother retired from SAPD and now works for the sheriff's office down in Bexar County. Okay. But you asked what interested me in being a lawyer. I'm probably going to date myself here. Nowadays, kids watch Law and Order. But back when I was a kid, and I'm 64, so I'm dating myself. But back then it was Perry Mason and shows like that. So when I was a kid, I thought, hey, that's a great profession to be in. Is to be able to advocate for other people, to be a trial lawyer. So I think that's where I probably first got an interest in becoming an attorney.
Okay, and were you private before you got into or dove off into the political side of becoming a district attorney? Or
what a lot of people don't know about me is that I was a career prosecutor before I became a defense lawyer. I have actually worked under 4 different elected DAs. I started my career and cut my teeth, as they say, in the early 90s, and I actually worked as a prosecutor in Harris County during a time in the early 90s where there was a lot of violent crime in Harris County. So I've certainly
still is.
Absolutely, yeah. Believe it or not,
yeah.
But it was pretty bad in the early 90s. But you're right. I mean, we see violent crime all over in major cities and all over the country. But yes, I started my career as a young prosecutor and I have fond memories of being a prosecutor for the state.
We had a district attorney on several episodes ago, Kevin, probably 3 months ago out of Harrison County, which is up near my old neck of the woods before I transitioned down here to the wild side. And he was just talking about really the vacancies of how many district attorneys' offices really, just like law enforcement seeing, really with ADAs and prosecutors. And do you know what the remedy is to solve that, or do you have any recommendations as far as attorneys that are maybe listeners or viewers and that want to get into the practice of becoming a prosecutor? What route would you recommend?
Well, we obviously are seeing that in our office. When we're fully staffed, we have an office of 500 people, half of whom are lawyers, 250 lawyers, and the rest of them are investigators. Believe it or not, we have a police department within our office. We have 65 investigators who are primarily support staff for our prosecutors. But we're down not usually, but right now about 20 prosecutors. And I'll tell you the biggest reason is economics. We cannot pay our prosecutors what they are worth. They will come to our office, spend 3, 4, 5 years getting trained, getting all the experience they can, and then the private sector, lures them away. Personal injury firms, other type firms will pay them double what we can pay them, and I don't blame them for wanting to support their families. They got law school loans to pay, and that and just the work-life balance. What happens is, let's say you have 3 prosecutors in a court and one leaves. That leaves the other 2 to make up for that, and they're working harder and not making any more money. So I certainly understand the frustration, and oftentimes they will be lured away to do something
And
different.
you probably see that way more, I would think, as far as attorneys are concerned, because the private practice, the private sector pays a whole lot more than being a prosecutor. So it's probably more, it's probably a greater number with prosecutors as far as attorneys.
Well, it is, and it's a different type of stress, right? There's a big difference between, taking home a file where maybe we're talking about a probate matter, or divorce situation. Well, in our office, a lot of times we're making very serious decisions involving victims of crime, and we don't always get the outcome that we're hoping for. And so there's a lot of stress involved with the work that we do day in and day out.
Well, not only that, but as a defense attorney, I would imagine you get more leeway with the courts when you say, well, Your Honor, my caseload's too deep. I've got other cases I've got to be dealing with. Whereas if you represent the state of Texas and you have the full resources of the state of Texas, or the perception is you've got those, you don't get the same leeway when it comes to asking for continuances and delays and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
You obviously have been hanging around the courtrooms because that's exactly what the judges say.
Yeah.
Actually, when you and I, when we met out here in the hallway, I thought this guy looks familiar, and I couldn't think of why. From all through the 90s, I was an investigator with the Seabrook Police Department. When Kim Ogg was assigned to our gangs task force, and Joan Huffman was head of the family law unit. You were in the Harris County DA's office. We probably crossed paths a few times back in those days.
I actually was elevated to what's called I was a court chief in the juvenile section, and my job was to certify juveniles that committed crimes, very serious offenses. So I spent a lot of time in the adult courts, basically wrapping the cases with a bow in hand and saying, "Here you go." And during, again, the early to mid-90s, there was a lot of violent crime in Harris County. So, yeah, you're right. I do remember a lot of work involving Seabrook cases. Yeah.
How has just real quick before we dive off into another topic, is it Senate Bill 3 or Senate Bill 20 with the funding of the sheriff's offices and county employees?
Man, don't give me the line about the actual bill number.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called.
It doesn't apply to Berry County, though.
That's right. It doesn't. It applies
It's
to
only
other counties.
less
That's right.
than 300,000
That's right.
people.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I was going to say and just in my discussion with Reed McCain, the DA in Harrison County, his office is seeing a benefit from that Senate bill, and so I was just going to ask if that was something you could look forward to maybe recruitment, but I guess that you guys don't qualify for it due to the population.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the increase in pay for rural DA's offices.
Yep.
It doesn't apply to us because we're an urban area. So, unfortunately, our prosecutors are going to benefit from that.
The stated purpose was for rural counties, which applies to 243 out of the 254 counties in Texas.
Yeah, that was by design, I'm sure. Well, so you worked for Harris County for many years and then transitioned back home, I guess. What brought you back to San Antonio?
Actually, I worked for 3 years in Harris County while my wife was in law school in Houston, but I worked in the DA's office in Bexar County under two different elected DAs.
Okay.
And in the interim, I worked for Johnny Holmes in Harris County, but back in Bexar County, I worked for Fred Rodriguez, worked for Stephen Hilbig, and then I went to private practice. And really, the reason that happened, I mean, I intended to be a career prosecutor. I went to the career prosecutor school and the whole bit, but I decided I wanted to run for office. Well, it's a lot harder than it may look, and so I lost. But instead of going back to the DA's office, I decided to open up my own shingle, and then 20 years later, the rest is history, as they say. And but I made a decision back in 2018 to actually in 2017 to run for DA. I felt like I could do a better job of running the office in San Antonio and Bexar County, and so it's been a fantastic experience. I enjoy what I do because the people that work in our office are not doing it, as I've said, for money. They do it because they love what they do. They love representing, advocating for victims of crime. They love impacting public safety. So yes, it's an incredible time that I'm having in the DA's office.
We have a lot of listeners that are explorers, and explorers, I'm not sure if you're not really in the law enforcement realm as far as your career, but Explorer programs really target the youth, the youth in our within our society. And so, is there any type of those kind of programs for anybody out there that maybe want to look at, the prosecutor role? Is there a program out there that a young kid can look at to maybe follow in the footsteps of you and other DAs out there?
We would love to have that kind of interest in the high school level. We have had from time to time volunteer interns come to our office. We regularly have summer internships, I should say, and so we have people. We have several colleges in San Antonio, so we have internships that we offer to those schools. We have law school interns that come and work for us. Those are the only type of interns we can pay. You have to be in law school, but you can certainly put in some voluntary hours, and I've been known to provide a nice resume or letter of recommendation from time to time. If somebody is interested in going to college or a law school, that's something.
But as yet, it hasn't gotten down to the high school level.
Right.
Well, we certainly can. I mean, obviously, if we have parents' permission to work with us, I mean, I certainly would not discount that. But we haven't seen a lot of interest in high school kids coming, because we're downtown. You have to make the effort to come downtown. But we certainly would be very, very open to having an Explorer program like that.
It'd be good.
Sure, absolutely.
Recently, about last month or month and a half ago, speaking of Bexar County and speaking on your brother, sometimes family members doesn't necessarily just mean that you're a law enforcement supporter. But we had 3 San Antonio police officers that were injured and shot there in Bexar County, and several of we're not going to speak about the case, but we're going to talk about you've come under scrutiny and you've come under some by law enforcement officials. First, I want you to say, or at least to the San Antonio police officer or any deputy that's working for Bexar County out there that's listening to this podcast, what is your message to them about your support for law enforcement? Coming from you, what would your message be to them about carrying out their duties as a peace officer there in Bexar County?
Well, listen, I want everybody in law enforcement to know that I recognize how hard their jobs are. I recognize how dangerous it is to start a shift, not knowing whether or not you're going to come back home to your family, not knowing whether or not you're going to be able to put your head on your own pillow. I know that because I saw my brother go through it, and still goes through that. I've heard all the stories about having to chase down a crook or someone that commits a crime, and that individual fighting back. So I know how dangerous it is. I also we're aware of the proliferation of guns, and people are pulling guns on each other, and I know that how dangerous it is when an officer encounters somebody that there's a chance that someone may pull a gun on them. So I want the men and women in law enforcement to know that I appreciate the hard work that they do, and that we recognize the dangers, and I recognize the danger, and that I'm never going to do anything intentionally to compromise their safety.
Is your track record go with what you're saying to the listener out there right now?
I think it does, because if you're talking about assaults on peace officers, we have prosecuted individuals that have assaulted officers and have gotten results and have gotten convictions, and we've vigorously prosecuted individuals that harm members of law enforcement. And I'll tell you, because one of the things that I'm constantly hearing out there is oh yeah, you've got that liberal DA down in San Antonio, and he doesn't support law enforcement. Let me tell you something. If I was that guy, I would not have sought and obtained the death penalty on a cop killer. How many liberal thinking DAs do you think are out there that are willing to do that? But I said that when I ran in 2018. If I believe that the right thing to do is to seek the death penalty on someone who kills a cop, I'm going to do it, and we've done that. So, I may not have taken a victory lap, but I felt like that was the right thing to do, and I reserve the right to do that again in the future if it happens again.
But there are reasons why some high-profile folks in law enforcement have called for your resignation. There are differences there. There are issues there, and I don't want to put you on the spot on any particular case. I know there's cases you cannot discuss, but the rift that is there What are you doing to
Well,
bridge that?
Let me address the cause for resignation, because I think that they're ill placed. If the reason they're calling for my resignation is because that they believe that I'm the reason that violent offenders or people with criminal histories are out on the streets, I'm here to tell you that's not what we do in the DA's office. We don't set bonds. We recommend bonds. It's ultimately up to the magistrate judge to set a bond. And I will tell you that since the year that I've come in 2019, we have consistently increased the recommendations that we make to those magistrate judges. For example, on a regular basis, when somebody is arrested for murder, we will recommend a bond of $150,000. Now, most often, magistrate judges will follow our recommendations, but not always. Sometimes magistrate judges don't even ask us what our recommendation is. But we do recommend what I believe are appropriate, robust bonds for violent crimes.
So the cases that are being cited in these calls for your resignation, are those cases where the magistrate judges have in fact not gone with your recommendations?
Those are cases where we may have recommended a bond and the judge may have gone down a little bit. Like I remember one where an individual, we recommended a bond of, let's say, $15,000 and the judge knocked it down to $10,000, for example. But here's what I want to get clear, because I think the narrative out there was in every one of these situations, and I think there were actually 5 shootings in a period of about a week and a half, which, by the way, is an anomaly. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've never seen a situation where you have 4 or 5 shootings of officers in a week and a half span. But
I hate to say this, but you might want to get used to it, because we're seeing an acceleration of those types of cases, not only statewide but nationwide. Fortunately, and I know I told you not to do this, but I'm going to. A lot of officers are surviving those for different reasons, but more cops are being shot and shot at today than any point in history that we can remember.
Yes, sir.
And so there's a proliferation of those. In Harris County, you've got a committee of judges that have gotten together and basically have predetermined that they're going to release people on PR bonds, on $100 bonds across the board. Do y'all have that same sort of thing in Bexar County, or is it every case judged on its own merit?
Every case is judged on its own merit, and I'm happy to say that doesn't happen in Bexar County. I believe that our magistrate judges do a good job. They have a tough job. And let me tell you why I say that. Again, you've heard me say I've been doing this for 35 years. For 7 years, when I was out in private practice, I was a magistrate judge, and I'd like to say that's why I ended up with this gray hair sooner than later, because I was up all night long for 7 years on the weekends making those tough calls. But the reality is, prosecutors and magistrate judges don't have crystal balls, and all we have is what we can review in terms of criminal history and in terms of the type of offense that's in front of us. And if somebody comes in with a case but doesn't have any criminal history, then we have to judge that bond amount based on what we have in front of us. And again, going back to the calls for resignation, only 2 of those 6 individuals that shot at the officers had any kind of criminal history to speak of. And one of those individuals we tried repeatedly to prosecute, but we were unable to do that because we had witness problems. The victims were not interested in helping us prosecute that individual. The other one had to do with domestic violence history, and even in that case, the woman that was involved, the woman that was the victim of the violation of protective order, again, we had some problems with her cooperation. And all that to say that it wasn't a situation where every one of those cases involved someone that was out on bond on a violent criminal history. And so that's what I'm trying to do here is to clear the narrative so that people understand that we didn't just willy-nilly decide, somebody's got a violent history and we're going to give them a low bond anyway. By the way, something else that was said that's incorrect, the narrative that I heard was the reason these people out was because of the policy of low bonds. I've never had a policy of recommending low bonds on violent offenses what my directive has been to my prosecutors that work on the bank at the bank courts is use your best judgment in terms of recommending what you believe is an appropriate bond. So in fact, I think the term was lax bond. The DA down there has lax bond policies. Yeah. That's not accurate.
So is if it's not you, if some of this is not to blame against you, and if it's against the magistrates and the judges, are we willing to come out, you specifically, are you willing to come out and identify these judges and say, hey, you're going to call bullshit when bullshit needs to be called, and you're going to stand with law enforcement on that aspect, or is it because they're party affiliation?
Okay. Well, let me tell you that I don't even think that it's that easy to say that it's the magistrate judges. Yes, there are times when the judges will set bonds lower than we recommend. But I will tell you, quite honestly, there have been also cases where, for whatever reason, our prosecutors will recognize that a bond should be at a certain amount, and the magistrate judges set a higher bond. So here's the problem, and I'm talking about a case that happened about a week ago, where one of my prosecutors set a bond in a certain amount, and even though it was higher than normal, the magistrate judge, I think, tripled it. But here's the problem. That person still was able to get out of jail. Here's why. Because in Texas, we have a bond system that's based on a cash bail system where as long as you have enough money, you can get out. Right. It's not based on a risk assessment. Right. So someone who is accused of committing a murder and the bond is set at $100,000, if that man has $10,000 in his bank, he's getting out. If he can hire a bondsman that's willing to write the bond, he's getting out. So that's the problem. It's systemic. It's not the DA. It's not even the magistrate judge. It's the system that we have in Texas.
Is there not a statewide recommendation? Because where I came from in East Texas, it seems like a murder, even just a simple, and I say simple, it's just a murder charge, not a capital murder, but just a simple murder case. A judge in East Texas, from Bowie down to Panola County, I know over to Smith County, $100,000 to me would seem very small. Is there, and I'm asking this just for personal reference because I think our listeners probably would ask the same question. Is there a statewide bond setting formality, or is it just kind of depending on the population of the jails and depending on the politics within the DA's office or magistrates or so forth? But is there a statewide formality with bonds?
Okay, I think what you're asking about is there a statewide bond schedule that all the judges can follow? The reality is that's been found to be unconstitutional. There is a federal case out of Harris County called O'Donnell where the judges were following a bond schedule, and the federal judge says, you cannot do that. You cannot systemically just follow a schedule. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis. So while a magistrate a judge in East Texas may set a different bond from one in South Texas or one in West Texas, they cannot follow a bond schedule.
Okay, well, that answers that.
When I was working in Seabrook, I got to see this kind of firsthand because Seabrook is right there at the corner of Harris County. Right across the Clear Creek Channel is Galveston County, much more rural, especially back in the 90s. And then right across Galveston Bay is Chambers County, which to this moment is still rural unless you get way over there by Mont Bellevue. So I got to work in all three of those counties, and they are completely different systems. Yeah. Harris County is its own breed. So, right. So we would get somebody that would actually charge them out of out of Chambers County. They'd get a $1 million bond on the same exact charge that Harris County would do a $5,000 bond on.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. But there, like you said, there's also constitutional issues there. I'm curious about your intake system. Do officers, when they arrest somebody, do they have to call the DA's office and get charges accepted by the DA before they book that person into the county jail? Or do they simply fill out a complaint and an affidavit and submit it and y'all review it later? They
will typically, when they make that arrest, if we have two different kinds of cases we handle in Bexar County. The arrest cases where the officers respond to the scene, for example, let's say the perpetrator's still there, makes a decision to arrest that individual.
Which we would call an on-view arrest.
Right. Which is the vast majority of them.
Right.
Yep.
Yes, sir. And so then he brings them to the magistrate's office. He fills out a complaint, may have an initial offense report, brings it to us. We review it, make sure everything's where it needs to be. And so that's basically how that happens. So yes, they have to prepare a written report. Again, when I spent my years in Harris County, you could call in the DA's office and say, hey, this is what I have over here. Will you accept it or not? We've not gone to that method. I think there's some argument that it's something we should look into, but historically, Bexar County has never had that kind of a system.
Okay, you don't have 24-hour intake.
We do have we have a
Okay.
24-hour magistration system. Yes, sir, absolutely. We have prosecutors that are there. We also now have bond hearings where a defendant is appearing in front of a magistrate judge. We represent the state. The accused is represented by a public defender, and we'll each make a recommendation about where we think the bond should lie. But yes, we do have 24/7 magistration at Bexar County.
He mentioned Harris County, by the way. In the 90s, when he was there, when I was working for Seabrook, the charges were filed online by computer. There was a thing called the GEM system that was used to file all that. Years before that, when I was working in Baytown in the late 70s, early 80s, we didn't have computers. We didn't even have fax machines. We had a thing called a telecopier. That's how we sent the charges to the DA's office.
Why? And I guess because I've never worked in that environment where you would need a 24-hour representative of a DA's office. So how typically it would work, even somewhere in the metropolitan areas, not all, some, but the peace officer makes the arrest, on view arrest, possession of marijuana, or let's just say a simple assault, family violence. You take the subject to the jail. The officer would fill out a probable cause affidavit, complete the bookend, and then really at that point it's up to the DA's office to accept it later on. But it's almost like we've gotten into this, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've got this process where it's we have to get approval in order to make that arrest, and that's not.
Well, I think what the DA is telling you is that in Bexar County, that's not really the case. They make the arrest, they start preparing the report, and then they go submit it to the prosecutor.
Oh, but you guys are basically making
and to
sure
the
all the
judge.
elements are there to make that arrest, right?
Correct,
Right.
but in Harris County, you're making that phone call from the scene. You're
okay.
calling the
There's
DA's
the
office
difference.
to talk to an ADA to let them tell you whether or not to make the arrest. Yeah, so it's a whole different system. And Harris County is the only one in the state that does it that way, one of the few in the country that does it that way.
Which could be problematic.
Well, in metropolitan areas like San Antonio, Houston, Austin, Dallas, you've got a larger number of cases that they're reviewing and that they're handling.
Yeah.
And the law says that an accused is to be magistrated without delay. So what does that mean? Does that mean 10 hours, 24 hours, or 3 days? I know from my years in private practice, the most frustrating thing is when a client of mine would get arrested at 8 o'clock on Friday, didn't get to see a magistrate till Monday morning. They were going to spend the weekend in jail. But that doesn't happen in the major metropolitan areas. And I don't know whether or not this was something that was implemented by local rule or because it's the law. But we do have a magistration system that requires that we be there 24/7, that we be able to review those cases and make those recommendations for bond. And I think part of the reason is because the judges are there, and if the magistrate judges are there, then the prosecutors need to be there as well.
And I think the courts have, historically, the courts have said, you have the resources, therefore you should. If you're in Bowie County or Panola County, they just simply don't
Right.
have the same resources. So reasonable amount of time
Right.
means different things in different
Correct.
jurisdictions.
100%. 100%. There seems to be somewhat of obviously a disconnect, some between you or your office and some of the law enforcement agencies there in Bexar County. This is kind of a two-part question. I got in this career field in 2003. I'm not going to mention when y'all got into it because we're going to show everybody's age.
Right.
But it seems like to me, even growing up as a kid, that for the most part, and back to whatever you referenced at the beginning of this, you grew up watching Law and Order type shows. And those are it's fascinating to think back on that because, respectfully, we're all on the same team.
Right.
The officers make the arrest. We punt it to you guys to finish it, right? And so, at what point do you think that? And I'm going to reference this later on. That these major metropolitan cities, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Houston, at what point did we not get on that same sheet of music? At what point did we separate that? And it seems like that the DA's office can't be on the same team with law enforcement, or at least publicly. And is that a disconnect, or is that just the wrong perception that I've got on my end.
No, I think that is the perception out there, and that's part of why I'm here today. Somehow, somewhere, we've forgotten that we're on the same team. I will tell you that when we pick juries and we bring panels downtown to select a jury, they don't see any difference between law enforcement and the DA's office. We're all the same to them. And so I think that we do need to continue to remember that we are on the same team. There's probably a number of reasons where I think the culture today is different than when I started 35 years ago. And I will say this: I think that at some point when I was in college and going through law school, being a prosecutor, we were one of the good guys. We were on the side of justice and on the side of right, just like law enforcement. But somewhere there has been a disconnect over the years. I don't know if I can point to any one event, but I will tell you that certainly there's been a reduction in respect for law enforcement. There's been a reduction in respect for the system. There's been a reduction in respect for what we do as prosecutors.
For government in general.
Yeah.
I think that's true. And I don't know if it's generational, but we do see it every day, and there's a climate of distrust of both of us, and that's not good. That's not good for us because, again, I think we're both good guys, law enforcement and prosecutors. We can't do our job, guys, without you doing your job.
100%.
And we have to work together. So there shouldn't be this disconnect. Part of if you ask my honest opinion, part of the disconnect is where politics interjects, where it intersects with what I do. I'm never going to get law enforcement to totally agree with my philosophy, but the reasons that I've made the decisions that I have done while I've been in the office have been primarily for efficiency's sake, not because I'm this flaming liberal that I think nobody belongs in jail. No. The reform, and people are afraid of the word reform. Well, reform just means change. Sometimes change is good if it's going to benefit the way that you run an office, for example.
Well, I think if it benefits everybody, if it
Sure.
doesn't just benefit just these people over here, then I think that change would be bad. But if the benefit is for the overall better of society, and I mean law enforcement included, then I would agree to change. And I'll be the first one to tell you right now, and I think you probably agree to this, is that law enforcement, 99.99999% of us, we are good. We're good people, and we have a great job to do, and we carry out great jobs every day. Sometimes we have to fight with that court of public opinion.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's where the intimidation factor comes in with some peace officers. I will tell you that I've got friends that work in Bexar County, and there are days, if not every day, that they go to work every day, and they're hesitant about doing their jobs because they don't know how things are going to be perceived in your eyes or people in your office's eyes. And I think that court of public opinion and that distrust is, we all need to get back on the same sheet of music. And I think wherever we got disconnected, we need to get back on there. And I will ask you this: when's the last time that you or a representative of your office sat down with all law enforcement agencies in the same room? Is it a monthly, or when is the last time that happened? Because I think that, Kevin, you can probably pick up on this. Communication seems to be the lack within law enforcement, sometimes associations, and I think that communication is the key to getting back on track. And I think if we open that line of communication, that's where at least the baby steps are going to start.
Well, I will chime in here. By the way, thank you for being here. The fact that you
100%.
accepted this invitation,
Yep.
I think, is a big step. We actually were part of a countywide meeting last week. We've now had a couple of meetings with the Harris County DA. And like I say, Kim Ogg and I worked together when I was a cop in Seabrook years ago. But all the different law enforcement agencies and their unions were all invited to be there. And I think we broke some eggs. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done, but some things got done. And I think that's the question he's asking is, if you're willing to do this, are you willing to have that kind of meeting with your local law enforcement agencies and the officers and the groups that represent the officers to discuss some of this that you're talking about with us today?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, we regularly engage in conversations, the chief of police and I and the sheriff and I. We just, this past Saturday, I participated in a 5K run where Chief McManus and I chatted for a bit. Obviously there was a period during all these shootings where we were both frustrated. But we have had since the time I came into office, we have regular meetings. We meet once a month with not only the chief of police but the city manager and the assistant city manager to talk about the issues that are common with each other. I regularly talk to the sheriff down there. We have lunch at least once a month, if not more often. We have quarterly meetings with the Alamo Area Council of Government Chief of Police, where we make presentations on, for example, how to offer different types of evidence, or how we can assist them in their obligation of investigating cases and filing cases with us. So we do regularly meet with them and engage in dialogues.
If you're following Harris County's lead, I'm going to tell you that's not working. And here's why.
Yep.
DA Ogg was having the same meetings with department heads countywide. It's not getting funneled down to the troops.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just the word's not getting down to them. So I think that's where you have to agree to allow some of the boots on the ground, or their representatives, their association, their lodge, their union, whatever it's called in that particular jurisdiction, allow them to be there to ask questions, like I say, to break some of those eggs. We've had this conversation many, many times. When the calls for police reform started, a lot of people were working off the assumption that the problems in law enforcement are because of bad police officers. And I would argue what Tyler said, cops by and large are just decent, honest, hardworking people trying to do the right thing. When bad policing happens, it's not usually because of bad police officers. There are bad cops, we acknowledge that, and nobody works harder to weed them out than we do. But bad policing, more often than not, is a result of bad policies, bad training, bad leadership, lack of resources, lack of staffing. There's a lot of other things that cause bad police work to happen, and we're not addressing those. We're trying to pin it all on the cops and blame it on them. And I know you're signaling me like we're running out of time.
No.
Because I still want to get around to Brady. But I think you have to include the boots on the ground in those discussions, at least give them an avenue by which they can get a better understanding of what you're doing and what you need from them.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be the continuation of the point that I was making, is that even though there may be periods of time where the chief and I or the sheriff and I are not communicating, there are layers, and I'm using the phrase that the chief used himself a couple of weeks ago, there are layers under us where the communication is constant. Just today, my first assistant met with the chief's assistant or his right-hand man, and that happens all the time. Our division chiefs meet with the command staff of the law enforcement, and the boots on the ground meet with our rank and file. So yes, there is a constant communication, even if the people on top are not communicating.
Well, good.
You want to dive off into what you wanted to?
The two other things that I had on my agenda is, and one of the things we're seeing. By the way, have you ever recruited lawyers out of New York to come down here and prosecute cops?
Have I ever? No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Can you tell me right now, sitting here, just off the top of your head, how many current active police officers are under indictment in Bexar County today?
I think one that I can recall. Yeah, and I'll tell you, and that's something. Where did this disconnect come from? One of the things that I did was to create a civil rights division when I came into the office, because I discovered that we're one of the last major metropolitan cities in the country that didn't have a civil rights division. Not because I'm going after anybody in particular or any profession, but because we have to respect the Constitution, and we have to be able to identify whenever somebody's civil rights are being violated. And so that was a little bit of the distance from the police associations about why I felt the need to do that. But it was important for me to make sure that we were doing the right thing and making the right calls. And I'll tell you, for example, the concern is the officer-involved shootings and how many cops are being charged with that. I ran the numbers yesterday and today. In the time that we initiated the Civil Rights Division in 21, we have reviewed 31 cases involving officers that were involved in shootings. We indicted 3. One was then ultimately dismissed, so 2 out of 31. So that's less than 10%.
Okay, and let's face it, the vast majority of times when cops are involved in use of force situations, it's because they had no other choice. The vast majority of the times, the cops are getting it right. You know, again, we understand we have to be held to a higher standard. We have to be subject to review. We have to make sure that we are being as transparent as possible. I draw this comparison, by the way, because the DA of Travis County, who, by the way, you have an open invitation, Mr. Garza. Anytime you want to come in here and have the same conversation, we'd love to have you here. He actually was recruiting lawyers from New York with the line, "Hey, want to prosecute cops? Come to Austin." And we have a problem with that.
Big time.
That's not a teammate in our book. The other question I have for you, and you know this is the case. Cops have a problem with politicians that are supported by George Soros.
Yeah.
And that is the case with the Harris County DA. It is the case with the Dallas County DA. It is the case with the Travis County DA. And I'm pretty sure you have also received monies from George Soros. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Does that impact your decision making at all?
Absolutely not. I will tell you that I've never met the man. I don't know who. I've never talked to George Soros. And I jokingly say, to me, George Soros is like Howard Hughes. I don't even know if the man is alive. But I'll tell you that when I ran, obviously there was some publicity surrounding my decision to run. And I don't frankly recall whether or not his group reached out to me or vice versa. But the point is, he did support me when I ran the first time, and there was some support for my reelection. But I will tell you quite honestly and truthfully, the only way that I take support, financial contributions from anybody is there cannot be any strings attached. You're not going to tell me how to run my office. You're not going to tell me what policies to implement. If you want to support me, that's fine. But you're not going to ever call me and say, look, I want you to do X, Y, Z.
But don't we see a connection between Dallas, Austin, Harris County, or Houston, and now San Antonio with the violence? And then it all kind of stems back with the philosophies and the ideologies behind George Soros funded DAs. And I'm just telling you, street cops look at that and like, this is kind of odd. Every one of them took money from this guy, and every one of them have the common interest and the common practices of what I say y'all have. And that's where. So to the listener out there that's watching, a cop, what would you say to that? Would you say that y'all all don't think alike? Because it certainly looks that way from the cop's perspective on the boots on the ground.
Well, look at it this way from our perspective. It's what you said a minute ago, that and thank you for acknowledging that. In just about every profession, you have bad apples. You know, you have bad cops, you have bad teachers, you have bad lawyers, you have bad judges, you have bad business people. Does that mean
a lot more bad lawyers?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and
sure,
judges.
I'm sure you'll in this group that you'll have people agree with that. But the point is, you do have bad apples. But to paint a white picture and say all cops are bad, or all lawyers are bad, or all progressive prosecutors are bad is unfair. I will tell you that I know personally, because I consider them colleagues, the elected DAs in Dallas County. And I know Kim. In fact, Kim and I have this joke where we both worked intake together, and she used to send me to go get lunch because I was the young guy
You were
working.
the newbie?
Yeah, I was the newbie. But yeah, I worked with Kim Ogg. I know the
Do you
DA.
know that you and Kim and I are all exactly the same age?
Really?
Yeah.
How about that? How about that?
I'm sorry, she will be as of I think her birthday party is this weekend.
Okay. But the point is that I think it's unfair to paint any one of us as being, what we're not. I think the thing to do is to ask each one of us, what is your philosophy? What do you think? I don't think any of us intentionally is ever going to do anything that's going to compromise the safety of our jurisdictions. I can't speak for the policies of other DAs, but I will tell you that I've instructed my prosecutors to never do anything to intentionally compromise the public safety of Bexar County.
How long is your Brady list? You have any idea?
Yeah, I mean, we have a running list. We have we don't call it a Brady list. We have a non-disclosure list. But we regularly remove officers when those cases are resolved in their favor. If I had known that you wanted a specific number, I can get back to you and give you the exact number.
You don't have to. I was just
but
curious.
I mean,
And here's the reason I asked that question. Yeah. We hear horror stories about Brady and it's not just the metropolitan counties. There's a lot of DAs that they will put a police officer on a list where they just simply will not sponsor them as a witness in any case throughout eternity because of one isolated incident where the officer lied about being sick and called off sick and instead went and worked an extra job. But the same prosecutors will use dope dealers and gang members as witnesses at trial. They will simply try to rehabilitate them on the stand. Why won't we do the same for our police officers? Why won't we treat them like human beings instead of just simply saying, okay, we're going to run you out of the business because of a mistake or because you got accused of making a mistake? Yeah. But I don't hear the same horror stories out of Bexar County, and I'm curious to know if you have a different take than some of these other prosecutors do.
Well, I mean, I will tell you that we do have a list of officers, and not just officers. In that list are also other professions where because of their prior involvement in the court system, and there are issues of credibility, and we just believe that we're not going to sponsor them as a witness. But I mean, if it comes down to whether or not an officer is on that list, on a do not sponsor list, and we have to rely on that officer to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, then we have to really look close and hard about whether or not we want to go forward with that case.
Yeah. So you might still go forward with the case and rehabilitate the officer?
Well, I mean, it's certainly possible, but we'd have to make that decision in our office.
Okay, and I'm guessing it's different for San Antonio because they've got collective bargaining and they've got civil service and they've got all kinds of internal due process and everything, whereas opposed to, I don't know, Leon Valley or Converse or one of the other smaller cities in Bexar County where they are truly at-will employees. They don't have any internal due process. If they've been accused of something internally, how do you go about vetting and determining whether or not you should still sponsor that officer? Say an officer got fired from Leon Valley because he was accused of lying about calling in sick or whatever, and then takes another job pick one, Converse. Mm-hmm. How do you vet that to make sure you're okay with sponsoring that or not sponsoring that officer?
We'll have internal discussions in the office. We'll talk about, that officer's prior history and whether or not we believe that because of that, there's an issue about that officer's credibility, and then we make the decision about.
But you do recognize the minute that an officer is placed on what we call a Brady list, whatever y'all call it, disclosure, is that what y'all call it? Disclosure list?
Non-disclosure.
Okay, so you do realize that the moment he's put on there, 99.9% of departments out there, he's done. He's not going to be able to work in law enforcement for the most part. You're pretty much ending that officer's career. Do you realize that? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, it depends on the reason for why that officer's on that list.
Let me sum it up to you.
Okay.
I have called into sick and not been sick before, but not the Tmpa. When I was in law enforcement, happened to be my kid's birthday.
Why would you ever call in sick at Tmpa?
Oh yeah, exactly. Happened to be my daughter's birthday. Called in sick. I'll say it right now because I don't work there anymore. But I was a great cop. My colleagues would tell you I was a good cop. They shouldn't end my career because I called in sick and utilized sick time. And that's what we as an organization are seeing in some parts of the state.
Yeah, I don't know. And again, this may be something that's may get into an area that may be confidential. But I will tell you that I don't know of a situation where we don't sponsor a witness because he had an issue with calling in sick, unless it was something where we believe it was habitual and it was an issue of honesty. That if he was filling out forms when he said he was going to work and he wasn't going to work, but for an officer because he shows up a couple hours late or calls in sick and maybe he wasn't as sick as he claimed. I'm not aware of any situation like that where we just said we're not going to sponsor that guy because he did something like that.
And I guess I understand the argument when you've got a situation where you just don't feel like there's any way that you can justify using public funds to prosecute a case knowing full well that you're going to have an officer, and I hate to even mention any specific cases, but you've got an officer that's just going to get embarrassed on the witness stand, and credibility is going to go out the window. You don't want to waste time and resources on that. But I'm talking about these other cases where, why not? I mean, Brady and Michael Morton is actually the legislation that started this whole process. Yeah. But why not just simply disclose that information to the defense?
You know, and I think I called it non-disclosure. You're right. It's called a disclosure list. The other list I was talking about is a do not call list. Those are the officers where we believe that there are credibility issues. There are issues of dishonesty that would impact our case. But again, it's not, in my mind, it's not anything that, is because of some administrative issue. It's because, for example, and again, let's talk in hypotheticals. Let's say we knew of an officer that planted evidence, and we had proof that he planted evidence. That's a bad cop. You would agree with me, right? If an officer did something like that.
If it was proven, yes. Well,
yes.
I think 99.9% of cops out there that are listening would 110 cops. I'll say this publicly, and I mean from Tmpa. Cops hate bad cops worse than the citizens.
Absolutely.
Because you know why? It gives us a bad name.
Sure.
And because they know better, and because we have to fight through all the rhetoric and all the anti-law enforcement stuff anyway, and so we maintain a high level of respect anyway. And for a cop to do that to us. I just want to leave you that. Cops hate bad cops.
But if they
worse than
planted
citizens.
evidence, they shouldn't be making arrests anymore because they ought to be in jail. They
That's
should have
right.
lost their peace officer's license,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
But what if we don't discover that the evidence was planted until months or even years later? We have actually exonerated people because we have learned later that the officers did just that. But again,
Okay,
that's an example.
But you have two lists. So you've got one that is actually the disclosure list where
Right.
we're going to give this to the defense.
Right.
And if necessary, we'll let the judge make a decision on the credibility of this witness, or the jury, for that matter. And the other one is the will not sponsor, do not call this person as a witness.
Right.
So you got two different lists.
Right.
Do you think most DAs do that?
I mean, I can't speak for other DAs. I know that we do that. So I mean, I've never taken a survey of what other DAs do.
You're the first one that's told me that you have two separate lists. They've all told me they have just one list.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's not a secret.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
I think we've gone over
Surpassed the time. Well, Kevin, you got anything else?
I just thank you very much for being here. Really
Yeah,
appreciate
really
it.
do think these are difficult questions, and I think you and I and Kevin having the discussion about getting back on the same sheet of music and getting back on the same page. I think you coming here is just a testament that you're willing to do that. So again, thank you. I greatly appreciate it. Anything else you want to lead the listeners and the watchers, being the DA of Bexar County, to speak to the officers that work your county?
Well, I'd like to leave you with this. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and I certainly am willing to come back if you ever want to invite me again in the future. But I'm certainly willing to sit down and talk to any of the officers in my jurisdiction, in my county, so that we can clear the air and work together, because we're all about the same thing, which is public safety.
Yeah, well, Tmpa can facilitate that.
Well, let's make a deal. We'll do this again sometime, but we'll do it remotely from Good Time Charlie's.
There you go. I like that.
100%.
Get some chicken fried steak.
Hey,
Yes, sir.
These two guys right here are super busy. I'm not. I just got kind of popped in for the day from Wimberley, Texas. By the way, Wimberley, shout out to the Texans. Go Texans. Hope you guys make the playoffs. But we like to end each episode with 3 rapid-fire questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. First is, what is your favorite cop movie or line from a cop movie?
Clint Eastwood, do you feel lucky?
Oh, yeah. That's probably the most common answer. The second question is what's your favorite patrol car that you've ever seen or been a part of? I know that you haven't really rode out in one, but what's your favorite law enforcement vehicle?
When I was a kid, I used to love the Mayberry, the Andy Griffin car, the one with the cherry on top.
Yeah.
That
L
one.
63 Ford Galaxy.
There you go.
Well, it's a Ford, and I'm
And then
game
a close
for it.
second was Dragnet, Joe Friday's car. That was another one.
Oh,
that
good
one.
Lord. I had
Yeah.
no idea what that was.
Yeah.
Well, the third question is, what's your favorite drink of choice when you are relaxing and enjoying some time off, because we all deserve it?
Okay, I guess I can. Favorite drink of choice. I mean, I'm.
Adult
beverage.
Okay, I was going to ask
Adult
that.
beverage.
Modelo Especial. I'm a Mexican beer in a bottle.
There you go. That's great. Good stuff. That's good stuff. You got anything else, boss?
No, sir, we're good.
You guys stay safe out there. Please, please, please be safe. Check out the Tmpa clay shoot coming up November 3rd. God bless you, and as always,
And if you haven't downloaded the app, make sure you do.
yeah, exactly. I actually got the hand thrown up. It's November 2nd, so I apologize about the date. You guys stay safe. God bless you, and as always, may God bless Texas.